What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So I did want to go over something I have been thinking about a bit. Now, I do want to mention, of course, the Crew 1 is indeed going to be over next year in March of 2024. So, of course, I did want to go over one more idea I did have on this game that I, of course, did want to run by all of you to see what you actually think about this. So we do know the Crew 1 did have something called the Faction, which was basically going to be like a said split of like different things you can be a part of. For example, there is going to be like a wolf, an eagle, a crocodile, a snake, and a bear. And of course, you basically pick that said faction, and that would actually give you different events. And of course, every player could then pick one of those said factions and be a part of it. And then at the end of the month, you would then actually be able to do like a set of special events after that. That would most likely give you more money and XP, which of course here back then was going to be an insanely great way to actually make a lot of money, but it would most likely have to be a different design if it was in Motorfest. And my biggest question to all of you is, do you guys think something like this would work? Do you think a faction design like this would work in Motorfest? And if it did, how would they actually have to design it? Now, of course, the design concept of the faction was actually going to be insanely cool in the aspect that you can make a lot of money from it. And of course, you can also make a lot of money like daily, at least depending on the faction you were in. Which, by the way, I'm going to go more over that here in a second. But after that said faction would end every single month, you can then farm a few events to make a lot more money. And also, you would get a lot more XP and stuff like that from them. Now, the big thing about this, though, guys, I would say one of the biggest issues I did find doing the factions back in the day, which, if you are wondering, was the #1 way I actually made a lot of money back then. And I would say that was probably like one of the most efficient ways because one event would give you around like $90,000 to $100,000. But I have to admit, though, even making that much money around those 3 days that it was active was honestly going to be a pretty cool design. Like, I did find it really fun doing those set events basically over and over, and of course making as much money as you possibly can. And I would say if you were in the winning faction, it's probably going to be one of the best things ever. Now, of course, back then, each part of the map did have like a different area that was tied to a said faction. So, for example, back then you'd have like the mountain states being like a wolf, and then of course like the west coast might end up being like a crocodile. Do keep in mind, each faction, of course, would have the set area that you can win them in, and it's going to go by each player action. And then, of course, the special event would pop up where you'd basically make for them, and then that way you would actually build reputation to have that said faction win that area. And then, of course, the special event would pop up where you'd basically make a lot more money a lot quicker doing those said faction races that way. Now, I have to admit, guys, the biggest flaw with the factions back then was probably going to be, well, many of the factions were never actually going to be picked by basically anyone. I did notice the Wolves was probably the only one that actually won everything. Like, I never saw any other faction being picked, so basically the exact same one won every single month that went by. And it really ended up being a thing to, well, why would I end up picking any other one, because none of those said factions will end up winning anyway, so I might as well pick this one. And of course, doing that, you might actually have to do less work because everybody's in the exact same faction. So I would say having like 5 of those probably isn't going to work in Motorfest, but if we look at something like Motorfest right now, we do indeed see like 3 different things in a main stage, which of course is going to go on for that entire month of that said season you are in. And that obviously does change afterwards in the next month with like a bunch of new summits, and like you can also get rewards from the main stage that way. So maybe adding something like a faction system into this game would be a bit too complicated. But who knows, maybe they can add this to where it could actually be on top of like PvP, or like maybe you can actually get rewarded for doing a lot of different events in that said month around the entire map. And it would most likely track like the amount of events you do, or like you get extra XP from them. That would then add to something like a faction that you could then do like a special event at the end. Which, who knows, maybe they can add like special modifiers to those said events for like maybe 3 to 4 days for players to grind them out, and that way you might actually get a lot more money and XP that way. Now, I would say one of the biggest issues with this design is, yes, you can make a lot of money and XP from them, and most likely get like better luck on getting a better part set, or even like parts you might be missing. Now, if they were to add something like the faction update into Motorfest, how would this honestly work? And what is going to be the best way they can do this to where it is going to be fair for everyone? For example, guys, if they were to add something where basically everybody can't do it, or maybe it's going to be like a small percentage of that player base. It's probably not going to be that great, and a lot of players are most likely not even going to want to bother. For example, if we look at many of the updates back in the Crew 2, everybody can do them, and one of my favorite ones was going to be these stories where everyone can complete them, and also get rewards for doing them, but you also make money and stuff per like each step, so it is going to be extremely rewarding when doing so. If this was going to be locked behind a certain thing you had to do for it, maybe you actually have to play like PvP, or like maybe you have to do the summit and like do a certain amount of events to even get into it. So I was thinking though, what if they did end up adding something like this to where it is going to be similar to like the main stage lasting an entire month? For example, guys, what if they added two different factions? Let's say one's maybe like a volcano, and for the benefit of the doubt, I might say a crocodile. Let's say you end up picking the volcano. That one's going to give you more money and XP for every event that you actually complete while being in that faction. The other one, of course, is going to be the crocodile. For that one, you're going to get more parts or even better parts every event you actually complete. So if you are maybe looking for more money and XP, you can pick the other one. And then, of course, go back to the other faction and get more parts and stuff that way. I feel like that could be a decent way they could maybe implement this in there. Now, I would like to know what you think about this in the comments below. Do you think something like this would end up working, or is it going to be way too complicated?